What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Sound Design with CALLEN, episode 3. This week, we're going to be diving into Serum, and I'm going to show you how I made a crazy foghorn bass like this one right here. Let's check it out. Crazy. Let's do it. All right, guys. So now that we're in Serum, let's go ahead and dive in. First things first, we want to make sure that oscillator A and oscillator B are both set to sine waves. Oscillator A, we're going to go ahead and bring down 2 octaves. We want to make sure that our unison is up to 2 voices. Next, we're going to go ahead and bring our detune down to 0.04. We want to bring our blend down to around 17. Oscillator B, we're going to bring the detune down to 0.02. And we're going to bring our blend down to 29. Make sure that both the random knobs are at 0 because we are going to be FMing. Next, we're going to go ahead and turn on oscillator A's FM, and we're going to FM from B. Make sure that the level on oscillator B is at 0. And we also want to go ahead and bring down the level of oscillator A to 0 as well. We will be using LFO1 to modulate the level in just a few moments. We want to make sure that sync window half is on for oscillator B. And we're going to just bring this up a little bit to 1.36%. All right, now that our oscillators are both set up, we can go ahead and jump into the filter tab, which is my personal favorite. We're going to go ahead and enable the filter and select the miscellaneous tab, and we're going to use the reverb filter. From here, we want to make sure that both oscillator A and oscillator B are both selected so that the filter is applying to both oscillator A and oscillator B. Next, we're going to bring our cutoff down to 32 Hertz. So it's going to be in the low range. We're going to bring our resonance down to 3%, our damp up to 53%. And the drive is going to go ahead and stay at 0 because we're going to also be modulating this in just a few moments with our LFOs. Go ahead and leave the mix at 100%. All right, now that we have everything set up in oscillator A and oscillator B, as well as our filter, let's go ahead and start drawing our shapes with the LFOs. LFO1, you're going to want to go ahead and draw a shape that looks sort of something like this. Make sure that you have a nice little ramp at the beginning of your sound because we're going to want the sound to gradually come in nice and slow as opposed to it being sharp and quick like this. So make sure that there's a nice little ramp that gradually is going to bring the sound in, just like that. LFO2 is going to be almost identical, except for we're going to do things a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and draw a very similar shape like the one that we just drew. The difference is our starting point is going to be up a little bit higher like this. And we're going to want our end point to come up like this gradually. A nice little bump right here. So very similar to LFO1, except for the starting point is going to be up a little bit higher and our end point is going to be going up instead of down. Now that we have both the shapes set up, let's go ahead and start assigning LFO1 to different parameters. LFO2 we'll come back to later. Right off the bat, we're going to use LFO1 to modulate the level of oscillator A. But instead of it being on quarter notes, I want to bring this down to 2 bars. Make sure that this is set to trigger mode and not off. If it's on off, it's going to start at random points. Notice how the line keeps starting at different points. We don't want that. We want to select trigger because what trigger does is it always starts it from the very beginning every single time you hit a note. Off, on. The next thing that we're going to do is set LFO1 to the cutoff of our reverb. We want to bring the reverb cutoff down to -7. Next, we're going to assign it to our drive and make sure that it's turned all the way up to 100. And right off the bat, we can already hear a major increase in gain. So that's going to really drive our sound home later in the processing. Let's keep going. Next, we're going to assign LFO1 to the dampness. We want to bring this down to -3. Again, make sure that our mix is set to 100. The next thing that we want to do before heading over to the effects tab is turning on our sub oscillator. What the sub oscillator does is add low end to the sound that's being created between oscillator A and oscillator B. So let's go ahead and bring this down 1 octave. And we're going to set this to a triangle shape. We're going to go ahead and bring the level down a little bit, just to 48%. And you can already hear the difference in the sound just from adding the sub alone. It's adding that extra grit to it, that really dark underlying tone that just sounds really awesome. That's going to come out even more once we start adding distortion and other effects to it. Now that our oscillators and filters are set up, let's go ahead and move over to the effects tab. One thing I do want to do though is bring our master down before we head over to the effects tab because we are going to be compressing and adding a lot of distortion later. We just don't want to be clipping super hard, so just make sure that you bring your master output down before we start applying the effects. All right, so the first effect that we're going to want to go ahead and add is our hyperdimension. We're going to go ahead and leave rate and detune where they're at. However, we are going to adjust the mix a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring our mix down to about 10%. And our dimension, we're going to go ahead and just bring up 1%. I know that sounds really silly, but it does make a difference in the sound. And what hyper does is it just adds a little bit of width to the sound itself. Next, we're going to go ahead and click the distortion tab. We want to make sure that this is set to stomp box. Make sure that your drive is set to 0% because we do want to use LFO1 to modulate that. We're going to go ahead and bring our modulation down to around 59. So just A being really quick with and without the distortion so you can hear the difference. Next, we're going to go ahead and turn on our phaser. We're going to go ahead and leave our rate and mix knob where they're at. However, we are going to adjust the depth, the frequency, the feed, and the phase. So let's go ahead and bring the depth down to 0, our frequency down to 231, somewhere close to it. That's good enough. We're going to bring our feed down to 0, and we're going to bring our phase down to 0. So if you're wearing headphones, you're going to be able to hear this a lot easier, but you can definitely hear a different tonality in the sound once you use the phaser. It's almost adding like a very low undertone to the sound. Next, we want to use our chorus. We want to make sure that our rate is set at 0.07 hertz, so you're not moving it very much. Delay 1, we want at 1 millisecond. Delay 2 is going to go ahead and stay at 0. The depth, we're going to go ahead and leave at 26. The feed, we are going to bring up just a little bit to 15%. And our LPF knob, otherwise known as the low pass filter, we're going to go ahead and bring that down to 50 hertz. And in this sound in particular, what the chorus is doing is also just adding a tiny bit more width to the sound. The next effect in our chain is going to be our delay. This is where things get interesting. So what we're going to be doing with our delay tab is adding a bit of a tonal delay effect that's really going to bring the sound to life. This is a very important step in the processing, so make sure that you do not forget to do this. So right off the bat, I want to go ahead and bring our feedback down from 40 to 37%. We're going to go ahead and switch this from BPM to link. We're going to uncheck the BPM and just have it on link mode. And you're going to notice the numbers change right here. We want to go ahead and bring these down to 4.88. So it's going to be very low. Next, we're going to go ahead and adjust this little guy right here. So make sure that this is set to 585. This is set to 4.4. It should look something like this. It's kind of like a bandpass filter. Go ahead and turn this on ping pong mode. And we are going to turn our mix up to about 50%. You'll notice a difference when you bring the mix up just a little bit. Again, not something that is extremely noticeable just yet, but these are all things that are going to make a major difference in the sound once it starts coming to life. Next, let's go ahead and turn on our compressor. First, we want to bring our threshold from -18 down to around -15. We're going to leave our ratio at 4.1. Our attack is going to go down to 90.1. We're going to set our release to 90. Our gain is going to stay at 0, but we are going to use LFO1 to modulate that. Let's go ahead and bring this down to around 22. And lastly, make sure that multiband mode is selected. Slowly but surely, we're starting to hear the sound come together. Next, I want to go ahead and give the sound a little bit more space. So let's go ahead and turn on our reverb. We can go ahead and leave this on hall mode, but we do want to bring our size down to 7%. Let's go ahead and bring our decay down to 1.5. Our low cut, we're going to bring up to 42. Our high cut is going to be 33. Our spin, we can go ahead and just bring down to 0. We're not going to need that. And it looks like I have the spin depth at 13%. I don't really think this is doing too much, but we'll go ahead and do it anyway. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and leave the mix at 0 because we are going to be using our macros later to adjust this. So don't worry about it right now. You're not going to hear the reverb effect being applied. Just go ahead and leave that at 0 and we will affect it later. Next, go ahead and turn on the EQ as we are going to be using LFOs to modulate the notch filters and getting some really cool tonalities in the sound in just a few moments. So first things first, before we even start adjusting these knobs, let's go ahead and set these both to notch. What the notches do is add little peaks or valleys in your sound to either A, clean up the sound, or B, you can increase the sound. So just for example, let me go ahead and show you what this sounds like. So what we're going to be doing is essentially applying 2 notches, and we're going to have one being down and we're going to have another one up. And essentially we're going to modulate them both together to create a really cool vowel sound. Let's go ahead and do the left one first. We're going to set our frequency to 57. We're going to set the Q to 60, which it already is. For those wondering what the Q does, it just increases the width of the notch itself. So you can see it moving right there as we adjust the Q knob. So yeah, let's go ahead and leave this at 60%. And our gain is going to go ahead and be 10.9. So your first notch should look something like this. Our second notch, we want to go ahead and set the frequency to 1253. Our Q is also going to be set to 60 on this side. So both the Q on the left and the right should both be set to 60. And lastly, the gain should be set to minus 10.4. At the moment, you're not really hearing a major difference in the sound, but once we start modulating these together, you're going to hear a difference. All right, so let's go ahead and drag LFO1 to the frequency of our left notch. We're going to bring this down to 51. And what the frequency knob is essentially what it says. It's the frequency. So we're using LFO1 to change which frequency is being affected within this EQ. So if I move it, you're going to see that the further to the right we go, the more the peak is going to affect the highs. Now we're slowly in the mids, and this is going to be our low frequencies, all right? So again, make sure this is set to 57. Let's go ahead and drag LFO1 over to this frequency. We want to go ahead and bring this down to minus 22. So this frequency is going to be more in like the high mids, if you will. All right, so let me go ahead and take out the EQ so you can hear the difference with it. So what we're hearing is this peak is moving along with this notch, and they're creating this valley effect, for lack of a better explanation. But essentially this peak is morphing with this notch, and it's creating a very vowely, kind of growly type sound within the filter. And once we get to the finished product, you're going to hear these things come out just a little bit more, but just to give you an idea of what the notch filter movement is doing. Last but not least, we're going to go ahead and turn on our filter and make sure that this is set to all passes. You can find that located in the miscellaneous tab. In here, we're going to be adjusting these knobs quite a bit, so make sure that you pay close attention. We're going to set our cutoff to 9884. So we're going to turn it almost all the way up, not quite all the way, but pretty close. We're going to bring our resonance to 75. The drive, we're turning all the way up. Our damp to 34. Our pan to 54. And our mix is going to go ahead and stay at 100 for right now. Whew, that's getting crunchy. It's sounding very compressed and just beefy. All right, so let's go ahead and assign the LFO1 to a couple of these different knobs here. Let's start out by dragging it to the cutoff. We're going to go ahead and just bring this up to 7, so we're not moving it very much. We're going to go ahead and bring it to our damp knob and bring this down to 5. Lastly, we're going to bring it to the mix, and we're going to turn this to 4. All right, now that we're done with LFO1, we're going to go ahead and use LFO2, and this is where the fun begins. So first things first, I want to go ahead and hop back into the oscillator tab. We're going to bring our FM up to 51%, and we're going to use LFO2 to adjust this. Let's go ahead and bring it down to minus 12. Wow, that's already making a huge difference just by adding it to the FM. Also, I forgot to note earlier, we want to make sure that LFO2 is set to 4 bars and not a quarter note. And of course, make sure that trigger mode is also enabled on LFO2, just like LFO1. Next, let's go ahead and assign LFO2 to our sync of oscillator B. We're going to bring this down to 33. And just from doing this, we can kind of hear a very, very subtle high layer being added to the back of the sound if you listen closely. Lastly, we're going to go ahead and go back into our effects tab, and we're going to assign LFO2 to our phaser. Let's go ahead and apply it to our frequency. We're going to go ahead and bring this down to minus 30. Watch our sound come to life. That is so sick. This, in my opinion, right here is like make or break for the sound. So essentially, you can get different tonalities with this frequency knob just by moving this up and down and trying different levels out. So you'll notice when I change this, you're going to get completely different sounds. That's my favorite right there, is around minus 30, but you know, feel free to have fun with this and yeah, come up with the sound that you like. Now that we have our sound in place, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a few bonus tips that you can do to even make your sound even cooler. We're going to go ahead and utilize our macro knobs over here. So first, let's go ahead and drag this first one over to our low pass filter. We're going to go ahead and bring this up to 45. Now, when we do this, you're going to notice an instant difference. It's going to add a little bit of a vibrato effect to the sound, which I think is really unique and cool. Pretty cool, right? So we can even call this like vibrato if we wanted to. And now you have a completely different sound. Another thing that I like to adjust is the drive of our reverb filter. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this all the way up. I'm going to call this drive. And this is just going to bring the sound out even more. I'm just going to leave it all the way up because I think that sounds sick. Another cool thing that we can do is go ahead and just add this to oscillator B's sync. Let's go ahead and title this oscillator B sync. And we're not going to need to move this too much, but just from adjusting it even slightly, we're going to get some really sick sounds out of it. You can get even like a really cool sustain bass from this sound. And finally, like I said earlier, if you want to give your sound a little bit more space, you can even add this to like maybe your reverb knob. And now you can add just a little bit of reverb to your sound. You can mess around with the knobs, get different kinds of reverb effects. And really what it comes down to is just adjusting these knobs to your own personal preference. There's no right or wrong answer. You're going to get a lot of really cool, unique sounds just from moving a bunch of different stuff around. So, you know, don't hesitate to have fun, experiment. And I really hope that you enjoy messing around with this patch. So go have some fun, make some sick drum and bass, make a dubstep track, whatever it is. And yeah, send me what you make out of it.
Thank you guys again so much for tuning in this week. If you liked today's video, don't forget to follow me for more content.